went through 15 years of a relationship with my ex where all we tried to do was help everybody else and get him to a healthy place, and I gave up on a lot of myself. Like I didn't know how to take care of myself really. I was a mom, I had 2 little boys, and I eventually got to a point where I'm like, I've given up on who I am.
Welcome to the Millionaire Mentorship Podcast. We are in Clearwater, Florida. I've got Annie Yatch, who is a coach and leadership accelerator coach. And she spoke on the first day yesterday and did an amazing job. And I was like, hey, will you come on my podcast? We're just doing a pop-up podcast right now. And I want to hear about your story, Annie.
So let's do it, right?
Yeah, you were totally open. I actually pinned you down at lunch. I don't know if you know it was at my plan. But I was like looking for you. I sat there. I was like, hey, there's no
escape. There's no escape.
There is. Well, yeah. I mean, it would have been rude if you escaped. So.
I would not have escaped. I could tell you had a burning question that you wanted to ask.
For sure, because you were hitting on a lot of key points in there that I think that a lot of times people internalize and don't realize that anybody else is actually dealing with them, and you kind of brought it to the forefront. So everything in our life breaks down to trauma, and that's kind of what you boiled down. So. Talk about where you are or where you came from and how you are doing what you're doing right now.
Sort of a wild story. I mean, I grew up in a family in the Midwest, middle of Michigan, and I knew I just wanted to get out and have more of an experience of life. I ended up at Georgetown School of Foreign Service, which is basically a recruiting area for going to CIA or DIA. I ended up working for the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Wow.
And
surrounded by smart people.
I don't know about that.
Well, I do. If you must have tested something high.
I did okay on the reading part of the SATs, but my math portion was very low, so I'm very normal, I promise.
George Washington's not a normal school, but we'll go with that.
That's true. So, so I went there, and basically what I found out I was really interested in, even though I went to school for international security, counterterrorism, a lot of that work, I loved watching the behavior of people, and I wanted to help people change their behavior. So then fast forward, I went through undergrad, grad, launched a restaurant, one of the high-end ones in D.C.,
Oh, you did?
Yep, and an attorney had about $2.5 million and was like, I need you because you are organized, and I need the chef. So launched a company or a business restaurant that way. And then I guess that sort of started the entrepreneurial side of me. But I ended up working with the Navy SEAL teams because I was dating a Navy SEAL. And I found his brain so amazing. I was like, gosh, he thinks so differently than everybody else. How can we take this information and bring it to normal people like me so that I could be a higher performer? What
about him thought differently that you picked up on that you were like, you think way differently than other people? What was that? So what I noticed about his brain was that he was in a constant contingency planning mode. Everything was planning, but planning to fail, so that you had like 3 different plans if the main plan failed. And normal people, we don't plan like that. We just come up with one plan and they're like, okay, let's go after this plan and make it happen. But if you never contingency plan, then your entire team can't move quickly through situations that you run through in business. Yeah, I kind of have this similar planning in my brain. I always plan my stuff going. I don't think that happened. Like, I didn't start thinking like that. So that's what you were like. Okay, I don't see normal people thinking like this. So wanting to get into your world. So that's how things started. That's how things started. Plus, he was very attractive, 6'3", good-looking guy, and I was like, you are someone I could have some fun with. So. And how did that work out? Well, we ended up. Let's just get right into it. Well, it worked out well for about 15 years. We built a lot of businesses together and impacted a lot of lives. But what we ultimately discovered is we're much better off as friends. We weren't really like that romantic partnership. Mm-hmm. So people were very upset when we ended up separating and getting a divorce. But we're great co-parents now. Our kids are doing great. And we both have gone after our passions. And my passion was always, how do I help entrepreneurs? Because I watch entrepreneurs suffer. They want that freedom so badly, but they create this internal struggle and suffering that the only way to break through is to learn more about yourself and to do this work on your trauma. Okay, I want to take a deep dive on what you just said right there, because you said that yesterday in your speech. You said that the reason why entrepreneurs sometimes don't want to solve the problem is because they enjoy the problem because it brings them back to the chaos of their childhood or their life or something like that. Can you explain more about that, Annie? Yes. So entrepreneurs typically have what I like to call the fight or flight response, right? It's hardwired into them because something that happened to them when they were a little kid between 7 to 11 years of age cemented in this survival mode for them.
And in survival mode, they got really good at solving problems, and they got really good at managing despite a lot of chaos, right? So that perfectly tees up a person to become an entrepreneur. Because what do you deal with as an entrepreneur? High risk in everything, constant things changing, need for constant adaptation, managing chaos all the time, and you get really good at managing chaos and solving problems that nobody else can solve.
Right.
Right? And so now you've set yourself up where all the survival techniques of that little kid are playing out in your adult life, but the 7-year-old little kid is driving the bus of your conscious brain activity.
I knew there's been somebody else running my business.
Like, it's not me, it's the 7-year-old.
I always felt like a kid at heart. So, that's interesting because everybody always says, I don't know if you remember, you're a little bit too young to remember, but Love Line with Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla.
Dr. Drew.
And they were always saying it always boils down to childhood trauma. It always boils down to childhood trauma. So, besides, the biggest thing that I can remember in my life was my parents getting divorced. Like there was, and then at 43 years young, I'm 46 now, my parents told me that we lost our house to foreclosure, and I know we moved around a lot during that period of time. So that's the only thing I've been able to identify, but I'm sure there's got to be more.
There's always more, because what we can identify consciously is very different than what's in our subconscious, because our subconscious runs 11 million data points a second. Our conscious brain only runs 40. So we can only pull 40 data points.
That's not everybody, though. Somebody are like 1 second, right?
Some people have the memory of a goldfish.
Yeah, that's right.
But in reality,
What'd you say?
I said some people. Oh my God, you're so good. So this issue of the subconscious brain, right? There's so many data points that we can't access because our brain is trying to keep those key things that would change us forever hidden.
Okay.
Because if we could change those things, we already would have changed them. And that's where entrepreneurs get stuck, because they start hitting the ceiling of their own actions and their own ability to create wealth, right? I had one gentleman, he kept making the same $9 million mistake over and over and over again. And finally,
What was it?
Now I can't remember because I worked with him probably 6 years ago now.
Okay.
But there was one gentleman, I can share his story. He never wanted to make past $2 million, as weird as this sounds. In his brain, there was a subconscious trap where every time he'd get close to making over $2 million with his business, he would get horribly sick, horribly ill. And what we found out when we did some work together was that his dad died only having made $2 million. So he was subconsciously trying not to beat his dad and trying not to best his dad. And so he would get himself physically sick, not even knowing he was doing it, and he couldn't get out of that pattern.
How did you find that out? How did you go through that process I'm sure a lot of people, the one thing which has been crazy for this event this time is everybody's talking about their
rewiring the brain.
Yeah, and nobody talks about that ever. Everybody on social media is like, hey, I got it figured out. If you want this, just, hit the button and you're going to be fine. But so many people really, the guys that I look up to are like David Goggins and stuff like that. But all he says is just run your ass off and you're going to find out what you're really made of. So without me joining the David Goggins, that club, without me, everybody I know goes to some sort of therapy. And then you told me something else the other day, is that you've solved stuff through coaching that people have been in therapy for years, which makes sense because therapy is a business.
And therapy also is, you're just talking about the same thing, which means you're staying in the same loop, right? The whole point is, we don't need to talk about it more. We need to create an action plan to get you out of it, to resolve it in your subconscious mind.
Okay, so what are most people suffering from? Not even entrepreneurs, just people out there in general. It's childhood trauma, but how is that manifesting in their life?
So I would say that a lot of times, either in your relationship or in your business, you're trying to solve for something that happened with one or both of your parents, because as a young child, you decide subconsciously to either collude or rebel against something that your parents are showing you. And when you decide that becomes the basis of a lot of your subconscious programming. So I find that most people get into relationships with other individuals because they're trying to solve something that they got from their parents. And I can make this real by giving you an example from my life.
Let's do it.
So, for example, and my parents are great people, right? I didn't have a lot of trauma as a young child. But trauma is really a perceived loss of control. So we have perceived losses of control.
Interesting.
That we don't think are bad.
Yeah.
So that's why people hate the word trauma, because they're like, well, I don't have any trauma in my life. And I'm like, but you do have perceived losses of control. And that's where we start. But with my family, I married my ex-Navy SEAL husband because he was the perfect combination of my mom, who had 3 kids and a dog under the age of 5, that she had to manage. And it's not that she neglected me, but she just didn't have a lot of time.
Right.
He also was sort of into this, like, I'm going to avoid interacting with you so that I'm always like looking for, how can I connect? How can I create something more here so we can have better connection time? And that was how it was with my mom, right? So I was trying to solve that.
Okay.
And then with my dad was a little bit more concerned about like the feminine side of a woman. He was always like, oh gosh, we don't want to be crazy. We don't want to be super emotional. And so I married a man that was then afraid of that emotional side of me. He was afraid of the feminine. And so it was the perfect combination.
What do you mean afraid?
So he used to tell me that I was terrifying. And I think it's because I have so much emotionality and I could read so much in people that he never really could tell what I was feeling and when I was feeling it. And so that can be very disorienting to someone who's
Can we just take a step back on that? Because my wife is like the most empathetic, like it's unnerving. Like if she sees like a dog about to fall, she's already felt it. And I'm like, okay, like, and I can see my daughter start to pick up on this now. And I'm like, you guys cannot get on my motorcycle anymore. This is getting crazy, right? So when you say like that your father was like trying to get you to be not emotional, is that what you're saying?
Well, I think, when I grew up, I think my dad really wanted to have a boy when he was, young. And
Are you the only child?
No, there are 3 girls.
Oh, okay.
He tried to have a boy.
He definitely wanted a boy.
Definitely wanted a boy. And so he, I think I tried to be that boy. Like I played all the sports. I invited him to all my games. He played softball with me every day after school. But I was definitely trying to be something for my dad instead of figuring out who I was as a kid.
You want to know if you would have known you were going to be a boy? If your name would have been Bobette, because I met one of those. See, he definitely wanted
My dad definitely had a name for me if I was going to be a boy.
Did he?
Oh, yes. Andrew George Oliver. I was going to have a full-on name.
Okay. Yeah.
But those experiences, I think, really contribute because subconsciously you think you want to solve something for your parents, and you spend most of your life trying to solve that thing for your parents instead of figuring out who you really are.
All right. So how do we do that?
So what I do for almost everybody who ever works with me is I run you through a process they call the golden coin process. And basically what I identified is that your superpower and your kryptonite are 2 sides of the same coin.
Right.
The thing that you're most amazing at and the thing that really causes you a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And so once someone is able to see from the lowest points in their life and the highest points in their life, and a series of questions that I ask, right, what the pattern is that they've been missing their entire lives, once they see it, they're like, oh my God, I've been doing that over and over just in different contexts.
How do you get to that?
It's just a matter of questions that I ask.
All right, let's go through a few of them.
So the first question I always ask is I ask people to come up with, okay, tell me the lowest point of your life.
Okay.
And you want to, some people have to.
So mine, I'll give you mine.
Yeah, tell me yours.
When I was an alcoholic 17 years ago.
Okay, and what was going on in your life around that time?
I had recently moved from Seattle. Okay, so I'll even go one step further. I had a panic attack when I graduated college.
Okay.
And I don't know why, just out of the blue. And then around that time, I noticed when I was drinking, my anxiety would be off the roof. And so, that played its part for probably 4 years. Okay. And then finally I decided to quit drinking because somebody recorded me, like David Hasselhoff, if you remember that, a good friend of mine. And I already had those conversations enough time where I knew I wasn't making the right moves. I was either the life of the party or the guy that you wish you never invited, And so, but to go back to what was happening is I had just moved to Vegas. Okay. So I left my family. Mm-hmm. My whole family still lives in Seattle. Okay. And I moved down to Las Vegas, started a new career, but I'd been drinking the whole time in Seattle, so it didn't matter. That didn't matter. But then when I really realized it was when I was in Las Vegas, okay, that I definitely that's when I quit.
Okay, so why was that the lowest point in your life from your perspective?
No control. I mean, I felt like I had absolutely zero control out of alcohol. Like was the whole definition. Like I'm like, you couldn't sit there and think about it without just wanting to put the whole bottle down. And so, yeah. Okay. And you like the feeling so much that when you're withdrawing, with alcohol for me is everybody wants to feel loose, right? Like, who doesn't want to feel like relax and so when you're drunk, you're really relaxed, right? Like, anything's going on tonight, and usually it was with me, like anything. And so for me, it was just, it was the low point of my life because I could take a little deeper. So I had just come from the highest point of my life in radio sales, where I was the #1 sales guy in all of Seattle, starting from zero, starting from the actual bottom as a promotions director. I quit my job because they changed formats, moved down to Las Vegas, but I was drunk at the job I had. When I came to Las Vegas, I ended up going to a party, getting in another fight, and then I was like, okay, I probably need to slow this shit down. So that's.
Was it the fighting that made you slow yourself down, or was it anxiety from the drinking?
Yes.
Okay, so what did that feel like?
Like just the worst. I mean, feel like you had to drink.
Felt like you had, like something else was controlling you.
Yeah, 100%. Like you had to either drink or lay in the corner. Okay. You had two choices: either stay in the corner all day and like just nurse yourself back to health, or go grab a drink and keep the party rolling.
So then, what was the immediate effect on you of being in the lowest state of your life? Like, how did you have to change to deal with that?
Oh, I moved back to Seattle.
You moved back. Okay. And what else?
I had to get a job again. I was a real estate agent prior to that.
Yeah. And then what else? Like, how did you have to change personally inside?
I had to admit that I had a problem, #1. Like, the first thing I had to do was like...
take ownership.
Yeah, like, so I had a friend of mine who's my best friend to this day who had quit drinking previously, and we were my drinking buddy in college. And I just was like, hey, man, I want to call you because I don't really know who else to talk to. I called my dad, I called him, and I'm like... and they're all kind of like, well, we already kind of figured that out, you know what I mean?
Everybody else knows. That's the thing to remember when you're in a trauma state. Like, everybody else knows that you're in that trauma. Everybody else sees it. Yeah. But you, usually. Yeah,
well, the interesting thing enough was the only person who had really seen me drunk were my friends. Okay. Not any of my family except for at a one wedding that I went to. But I had called my sister that day, and the guy I was doing shots with at the bar was her boss. And so I'd randomly just called her to say, hey, and she's like, you didn't sound normal.
Like I wasn't.
I'm like, well, that was pretty normal at that point in time, but I was definitely,
Okay. So what I would take you to from here is, all right, we talked about the immediate changes in you. I'd go much deeper into like really pinpointing a bunch of those immediate changes, and then I'd go.
Well, I liked how you got there already, and it kind of like, I know I want to go deeper, but we'll save that for another time. But I really liked the fact that I just was like, oh yeah, that was like the highest point, and then the lowest point, absolutely, like within probably 12 months.
Yeah, and what's interesting for a lot of people, right? Their high point and their low point can be very close, because once you hit the low point, all you want to do is get back up to the high point. And once you hit the high point, all you want to do is like move as quickly as you can through the low point to get back up there. So you probably have I feel out of control, then I feel in control because I take ownership loop of the trauma pattern. And you're going to replay over and over again, right? You're going to create moments in your life where you feel out of control so that you can take ownership again, dive back in. This is like a basic concept because we haven't gone very deep. Yeah. But I can see that there is a pattern around this, right? So you probably feel at the top of your game when you're in full control, you're taking ownership, you're taking action that is direct alignment with you feeling like you're in control of your life. The second you lose that feeling of control, it's going to push you into the low level of that trauma pattern, which is to me, I feel out of control. I feel like I want to drink again, or I feel like I want to do something to numb out from this or to get rid of the anxiety. Yeah. So that pattern would probably show up. No, it's not the same with everybody. Everybody's got a different trauma pattern. Right. That is based on their highest point and their lowest point syncing up. And then from there, I can identify, here's the success formula for you as a person. So if you want to stay in your success zone almost all the time, or as often as you can, I help people identify that too. So how do you stay in your success zone? Let's break that down a little bit. So, so we're talking right now, people who are listening to this podcast, people who are like watching, listening right now, they're all trying to get better. That's why they look at. So if, as someone who's done it for yourself personally, like, how do you help other people get better? Like, if I'm not able to hire a coach, if I'm not able to work through it, the thing that got my attention, as I told you, is Joe Dispenza. You had that book on there, and the book that I read was Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, which when you spoke, it was like he was speaking, because what I understand, and I want you to kind of break this down, Annie, which is like, as human beings, we don't
play our wins that we might have, we play our failures that we did have over and over again.
Not overthinking in a positive way, right?
100%.
Right.
So how do we get out of that thought pattern?
Well, everybody's got their own thought patterns that they get stuck in. Those are called the loops of the brain. And I think there are 4 different ways you can get out of it. You've got to look at it from an emotional standpoint, an intellectual standpoint, a physical or in the body standpoint, and then on a neurochemical level. The thing that most people miss is the neurochemical change that needs to happen to create a new neural pathway. But it could be something as simple as I have this behavior I want to change. You identify the behavior, and then you look at that behavior and you're like, all right, how do I break down this behavior to the smallest possible step and then start doing things a little bit differently? So I've worked with people who wanted to change the way they drink, right? And so they would by default.
What do you tell them?
Well, what I tell them is we got to first address why you're drinking, right? We got to figure out where this is coming from.
Right.
Some people drink because they feel like they're not enough. Some people drink because they want to numb out. Some people drink because it makes them feel like the best version of themselves. So you first have to identify what is the root cause of the drinking, which I usually can do in that golden coin process. But everyone's so different that it usually takes about an hour and a half of me asking those questions, and then I start to see the pattern, and I'm like, oh, now that I can see the pattern, here's the pattern. What do you think of this?
So how did you develop this skill set? This is where I'm really trying to get to. Okay, so you went from CIA ops to running a restaurant to coach.
Watched a lot of behavior in people.
Okay, so just through observation.
Well, a lot of it was observation, but then my ex-husband and I had a defensive fitness, fighting, and firearms studio that was 10,000 square foot of just like the coolest stuff that you could do to help people change their behavior around safety, to make them feel like they were more safe around firearms, around fighting, right? Because a lot of people are so fearful that if anything were to happen, they wouldn't be able to fight back or they wouldn't be able to avoid the scenario.
Which is crazy for me to think that.
Well, but think of it as a lot of women and kids and adults that don't have that type of training, right? So what we ended up doing was we ended up doing a lot of neurochemistry research, and what we identified was you really have to change the neurochemistry to change the behavior, and there's a whole process for rewiring your brain. You have to talk about the mindset level of consciousness and the conscious level and then the subconscious. So what I ended up doing in a lot of years of observing people and then doing this research and then changing people's lives in that way was I was like, there's got to be a better way of doing this. At the time, my ex-husband was going through a lot of health issues, and so we were trying to help him work through his PTSD, and I ended up finding that there are some things that work and some things that don't. There are therapists that work and don't. There are counselors that work and don't. There are psychedelic therapies that work and don't. And what we got to the bottom of was a lot of these things don't really work. Mm-hmm. But if you have a very specific methodology, you can have pretty profound change, but it needs to cover all 4 of those steps that I just mentioned: the intellectual side, the emotional side, the body side. That's why they have the book, what is it? Your Body Keeps the Score.
I fell asleep to that last night.
It's pretty fascinating stuff. So that's...
And what's the summary of it? Because I haven't finished it up.
So the whole concept behind Body Keeps the Score is that your body holds trauma and that you might not even realize you're holding as the trauma of the past emotions. And so the more that you can keep yourself out of the emotional state of the past and you're in an emotional state that is present or in the future that is positive, the easier it is to get out of that past trauma pattern that gets you stuck.
All right, so how does everybody become the best version of themselves? That's what probably people want to know. Like, if I was to ask for a recipe, how do I become the best version of myself? What steps do I take to undo the trauma and to take full control, or whatever, because you can't have control over everything? Or is it surrendering control? What is it?
So I would say the number one first step is you have to be willing to do the work on yourself. You have to be willing to really look at who you are, and the best way that I found to do that is through that golden coin process. But I spent a lot of time over the last year thinking, like, how can we help more people do this? Because it's not an easy process. So I looked at everything I did for the last 15 years with all of my clients, and I put together a self-paced program where they could go through the program to learn how to do this on their own, which it can sound intimidating, but I just didn't want people to have to go through figuring themselves out in a traumatic or painful way. Like, let's make this a little bit more fun, a little bit more interesting, right? So
does this cover phobias, the whole? No,
what it does really is it helps you identify what is the biggest traumatic pattern that is running your life. Mm-hmm. And then once you know that pattern, how do I put an action plan into place to resolve it so it doesn't impact me every single day all the time? Now, it's still going to impact you, but the key is we want your ability to respond and react to get yourself out of that pattern to be 10 minutes to an hour, not 5 days.
Yeah.
Being caught in that loop.
And you're working with a lot of high profile people, a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yes.
So they got to get pretty vulnerable with you, right? How do you?
Usually in the first session.
How do you break that down? I mean, you did it with me, but I've shared that story with me before, not the whole thing, but yeah, how do you get them to gain trust and to,
Well, I hope it's just because of who I am. I have like so much love that I pour into people. I think people can feel that difference because I've gone through so much in my life that I do not judge anything. And honestly, all I ever want for people is to be at their best. And so I think when you get into a container, that's what we call where you start learning with someone, you get into a container where all the person does is pour love into you and just give you more and more of that like connection experience. And that person cheers you on and they're like, listen, I don't judge anything you're telling me. I don't care about anything in your past. All I want is for you to figure yourself out, and I'm here as your guide. You're doing the work. You're the hero. It's not me, right? But I just try to let people know that they're accepted and they're forgiven and they're whole as they are. Because no one's broken. Everyone thinks they're broken, but no one's broken.
How do you not judge people? That's a big question. I know I'm judgmental. I
used to be much more judgmental than I am, but when you go through really hard stuff in life, I went through 15 years of a relationship with my ex where all we tried to do was help everybody else and get him to a healthy place, and I gave up on a lot of myself. Like I didn't know how to take care of myself, really. I was the mom. I had 2 little boys. Everything I did was to help other people feel like the best version of themselves. And I eventually got to a point where I'm like, I've given up on who I am. I can't keep doing that because I have nothing to give.
Right.
And so that was a massive reset for me. And once I did that, I was like...
How did that happen?
I think I went through, the divorce process, and I realized... You really don't know anyone until you go through a divorce with them. Mm-hmm. And even though my ex-husband and I really cared about each other and really fought very hard for the marriage, when the dream of what you think your life is going to be doesn't exist anymore, and you have to start from scratch, you really have to look at every single thing in your life and be like, do I want that anymore? Do I not? You have to look at every part of yourself, and I had to look at myself and be like, I have to forgive myself every single day for choosing to live the way I had been living. And when you forgive yourself every day for the pain of what you lived through, and you have to love yourself through that, you start accepting everyone. Like I've heard some of the, what people would say are the most horrible situations, horrible experiences in their lives, and I'm like, okay, great, that happened.
Yeah.
What's the lesson we're learning from it?
Right.
Because if I give any power to the trauma, that just gives more power to the subconscious lie that you're living in. And I don't want to give any power to the trauma because the trauma is not you. The shield that you create in your life to protect yourself from that trauma, it is not you. So the less power I give the trauma, the more power you get.
Interesting. So, not to belabor that point, but going through a divorce, I've heard this from multiple people that it's like the toughest thing to ever go through, ever. You pick up on what a lot of people say. You hear a bunch of people say something, and you're like, oh, okay, definitely. So, and you just brunch on something you really never know anybody until you go through a divorce. What did that mean to you?
I think for me, the thing about the divorce that was so difficult, because I've been through a lot of difficult stuff, right? I went through intense training. I learned how to stick fight, knife fight, gun fight. I learned how to work 18 hours a day for probably 5 to 6 years straight, right? I went through hard stuff, but the divorce, the reason why it's so difficult is because the emotional pattern is so all over the place. You could feel great about your decision one day, the next day you could feel horrible about it. You could be worried about the future of your family, the future of yourself. You can get to the lowest point in your life and be like, maybe I just shouldn't be here anymore. And for a lot of people I talk to, when you're in those scenarios, you definitely have a moment where you're like, maybe I shouldn't be here. And I had that same moment. Yeah. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, if I'm not here, how are we going to help? And as dumb as this sounds, right, in my head I was like, well, if I'm not here, who's going to do this work? Because nobody else's brain works like mine. I've got to do this work. This is why I'm here. So everybody says, you got to find your why, you got to find your purpose. And for me, the purpose was, if I can get myself to be free, then getting freedom for everybody else is going to feel like the best thing I could ever do.
That's how it kind of starts. When you hear guys like Tony Robbins, everybody started with that same goal. Jim Rohn. Everyone. So once you figure that out, now you want to share that. Kind of like with real estate for me, once I figured it out, I want to share it with everybody. Right. So that's where you're at. So I got a question though. So what part of you wants to go back to like that CIA training, or is that part of your life gone and it's...
Honestly, the vibrational energy of that was so low because it's a bunch of people who are afraid of so much and having to always manage so much. And now I'm like, every day I wake up, I'm so happy to be doing what I'm doing because all I see is change in every single person around me. Everyone's up leveling every day. I'm like, that just fills up your heart. You know, I have no desire to ever go back to any space in my life because I was so fully present in each of those moments. I'm like, nope, I experienced that. I'm good with that. I learned from it. Here's what I learned. I'm moving forward.
All right, now moving on to your dating life, because you mentioned you're dating right now.
Yep.
And if there's any eligible bachelors out there, how do they get a hold of you?
Oh my goodness. So they just go to my northstar.annie Instagram handle.
Send them a DM and a resume?
Correct. DM, resume, and hopefully they're just a really beautiful, energetic person who wants to go after fun in life.
But the reason I actually asked for answer the question is because, like, now you're going on dates, right?
I am.
So are you, when you're on that date, like, are you analyzing it?
Oh my God, this is what everybody asks me because they're like, oh my God, are you going to analyze me? Are you going to stare into my eyes and freak me out? Like, no, I promise I don't do that.
I'm not judging you. I'm just taking a little freaking piece of pad of the...
You know,
all right, has serious trauma issues from childhood.
I have realized I'm not here to save anybody, right? That's not my job.
Right.
My job is to show up as me and to see who is attracted to that. And the people that are attracted to it, some of them might want help, and that's when you develop a coaching relationship, and other people might eventually want to date me. If they do, that'd be great, and I would love to not analyze anyone in those situations. I don't. Because it's not worth my time, right? People have to do their own work. It's not my job to save someone or to fix them unless they specifically ask me and pay me to do so. So dating at the beginning was hard because I would walk into those environments and I have all my senses turned on and I would assess somebody really quickly and I'm like, yep, I can't be here. I have to leave.
Yeah, you already you didn't give them a chance.
5 minutes.
You didn't give them a chance.
No. But now the fun part about it is like I just have switched that part of my brain off when I go into dating and I just enjoy the experience. I have fun.
How do you switch a part of your brain off?
I'm very good at compartmentalizing information, I think. So
I believe I am too.
Yeah, I just turn that part off and I'm like, all right, I'm not gonna assess anybody. I'm just gonna see if I can have fun.
That's awesome. So I want to ask you a few more questions. I know they're getting ready to take this room over here. So what do you think the number one question that you get from people that they're trying to solve for themselves is, or that they're afraid of if they solve, it might do something to them?
So I think the number one question people always ask me is, if I solve for my trauma pattern, will I then lose my edge? Will I then lose that fuel that like really forces me to move and drive and all those things? And what happens is that drive and that edge, it's actually a skill set that you've developed over a long period of time. You'll never lose that, but what you will lose is the negative fuel that makes you feel like you have to push in a certain way. You can start using a positive fuel instead and it changes the game because again, negative fuel is a really low resonance and that energy doesn't allow you to be who you were meant to be in the world.
Excellent answer. So, because I always feel like I got a double-edged sword, and that's probably what a lot of people that you're talking to.
Coin, right? Superpower kryptonite.
Yeah, 100%. You feel like, okay, I don't want to lose what I got, but I would like to make it a little bit easier on myself, right?
Yep, and that's the whole point, right? We don't lose the edge, we don't lose the skill set, but we do give you the ability to feel fulfillment and to feel the good energy and the good feelings instead.
All right, cool. Well, we're going to wrap it up because we got people knocking on the door. We're just doing an impromptu podcast in Clearwater Beach, Florida. Annie Yatch has been gracing us with her. You've got such a cool, calm temperament. I feel like you could be like CIA or something like that. But for those who want to follow you, want to get a hold of you, want to get you on for coaching, how do they get a hold of you?
Yep, you can just reach out to me, DM me through Instagram, northstar.annie, A-N-N-I-E.
Okay, awesome. Well, we appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate you having lunch with me yesterday.
Thanks for having me.
And hopefully we'll see you at the Mastermind.
Can't wait.
Okay, awesome. Peace.
I've got an amazing podcast. We've had over 150 entrepreneurs, investors, businessmen, businesswomen, politicians, and we have interesting conversation. Think of it like Joe Rogan meets real estate meets going down the rabbit hole as Troy Kearns. My podcast is something that I really enjoy. The guests that we bring on are super informative and they will add a tremendous amount of value to you. Comment the word podcast and I'll send you a link to it so you can check it out and let me know what you think.